Andrew Reisenauer. Last name is Reisenauer.
Thank you. And my name is Bob Bauman. Today's date is November 6th of 2013, and we're conducting this interview on the campus of Washington State University Tri-Cities. So I wonder if we could start by you just telling us about how you came here, how you came to work at Hanford, what brought you here and when.
During 1950, I was a student at Washington State University on campus at Pullman, and I was invited down here as a summer employee, but for the summer of 1950. I went back to school and graduated in 51 and came right back to Richland. During that year 1950, I worked at the health department for the city of Richland. At that time, employee of General Electric, of course, and I was involved in sanitation inspections around Richland, milk supplies up in the valley, Yakima Valley, and Moses Lake area. Just general safety and sanitation involved in all the transition of the workers from out at the old town site of Hanford, Richland, North Richland Trailer Park area, and also the development of Richland, because at that time the uptown shopping district was just being, it was all under construction. Restaurants were being opened, generally just everything that involved in sanitation and health. Mosquito control was just being started. That was under our control. We had, there's a huge influx of people. You got problems with sanitation and food supplies. Food supplies, particularly when you're dealing with like 50,000 people, you've got to supply them with tons and tons of food coming in daily. And for instance, the milk supply is something that you can't ship for great distances like you can other products. The Hanford Engineering Works shipped in dairy farms, supported dairy farms. They built milk supply plants in Sunnyside and Moses Lake. They subsidized the farmers to bring in large numbers of cattle. I mean, you don't just dump people in and don't have, in a place like this where there's small towns and very, very scattered population, the sanitarians from the Richland area were inspecting all the dairy farms all the way up through Sunnyside and up into the Moses Lake area, just to give us a decent supply of fresh produce. There's any number of those kinds of things that went on during the area when all the people are transitioning from old town side of Hanford into the North Richland Trailer Park, which has 2,500 trailers or more out there, with bathhouses and laundry facilities for those people were built into separate housing or block areas, so that you've got all the sanitation facilities have to be inspected. You've got a brand new school out there, John Dam School, which was just nothing but a Quonset hut put together, and along with all the schools that were being built in the city of Richland, we were training food handlers, for instance, food handler classes, and making sure that the inspections got into the schools, and there was just a wide variety of environmental problems.
Sounds like a pretty challenging job.
Well, even water supply, because all the water supply in Richland and North Richland was furnished by wells. The treatment plant at Richland wasn't built until 55 or so. So you had well after well, and a lot of these wells were recharged by recharge basins with Yakima River Valley water and Columbia River water. Places like just west of here, that little valley over toward just west of George Washington Way, there's still a couple of wells in there that are being supplied, or part of the Richland water supply, but that a lot of that was water was being pumped out of the Columbia River into the basin above the wells. The wells are probably 75 feet deep, and they were using that as the method of cleaning the water, keeping the fish and everything else out of the wells. There's the area along Wellsian Way was all recharge ponds, because there's a number of wells in among the buildings down there. They're still being used, but the recharge basin has been closed when they discontinued the irrigation water through the city of Richland. Few people know that there's a tunnel underneath Carmichael High School, for instance, that supplied irrigation water and water to those recharge basins.
Yeah, I didn't know that. So when you were here then in 1950 as a student, right?
I was just a summer employee.
Right. What sorts of things were you going out and inspecting?
Oh yes. Oh yes. I inspected a lot of the restaurants, and because I was a bacteriology and sanitary engineering student up at Washington State.
Sounds like a great experience then.
Oh yeah.
Learned a lot.
It was very applicable to my studies up there.
Mm-hmm. So you did that in the summer of 1950. You went back to school.
I went back to school.
And then when you came back here to work,
came back right away after graduation.
And working for the health department again, or?
The health department, yes. I stayed with the health department until 1956 or so, shortly before the transition to town into a normal town.
And during those years working for the health department, what were sort of the biggest challenges you had? It sounds like there were a lot of challenges. What were sort of the most challenging parts for the health department?
Probably keeping up with the necessary state requirements for inspecting dairy farms and restaurants, and at that time we were also building the new swimming pool up on the hill. There was an original swimming pool in the old town side of Richland, down in Howard Amon Park. It was built very close to the river, and it was small, and it was not a safe pool because it transitioned water between the river and the swimming pool. When the river was high, it leaked like a sieve. So it had to be replaced. There's things like that, just innumerable.
How large was the health department? How many employees were we talking about?
There were there's also with the health department, they had the school nurses that were there was probably 7, 8 school nurses, and there were like 3 sanitarians and the health officer, and
And what was your job title after you graduated college and came back?
sanitarian. That was the job title.
And so when transitioned to being an independent city, right?
Yes.
What did you do at that point?
The health department was turned over to Benton Franklin County Health District. I left the health department because they had the personnel. They had hired personnel into their department to take over. I moved out into the area as a chemist and worked with the geochemistry outfit out there. Wells, drilling new wells out there, tracking contamination through the wells, the radioactive contamination and stuff like that.
And so, where were these wells drilled then? Different places. Where were the wells drilled? Different places on the site, or?
Oh no, I'm talking about the wells out on the Hanford project for the
right.
facilities out there. We did a lot of soil chemistry work along with that. Soil chemistry, soil physics.
And you said you would sort of measure contamination also as part of your work in the soil and the water, or you measured contamination? Is that one of the things you did also?
Well, the contamination out there was radioactive, but it did a great deal different than tracking contamination for the wells in the city. Just
and so how long did you do that then? How long did you work as a geochemist?
Well, kind of the job transitioned from the geochemistry into actually the groundwater modeling area where we built computer models for the movement of groundwater and contamination throughout where's the water moving from, and where's it moving to, and how much contamination is being carried along with it. We developed these groundwater models such that we were starting to apply them through. When Battelle took over, we started moving this type of thing into looking at county and problems and things all over the United States. I modeled groundwater movement in Brookhaven, New York, upstate New York, Nebraska, Florida, all over the United States. But it all started here.
And did you find significant contamination of the groundwater?
Oh yes, as far as it moved through the soils out here. Nothing significant that I know of ever moved to the Columbia River. It stayed pretty close to the production plants out there.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a lot of that going on out there now.
So did you work in different areas of the site then?
Yes, yes.
Just measuring at different places on site?
Yeah, I started out there in 200 West area, but then when I moved out of there into the 300 area, and my office moved downtown and up in the Federal Building, and then back out here to Battelle when Battelle buildings were built, and yeah, just.
I want to go back to when you came here in 1950 as a student. What was the town of Richland like at the time? How do you describe the place?
Well, it's kind of still like a frontier town, somewhat. Everybody that was here had come from somewhere else. People were very, very friendly because they didn't came here and not everybody was sort of new. The town side, of course, was being run by General Electric. Everything, you've probably heard that story before, but you could never tell from one day to the next what you were going to be doing the next day. You could plan, but you couldn't continue your plan most of the time because something else would crop up.
When you first came here, what sort of housing did you have? Where did you live?
Well, when I came in 50, I lived in a low-level wooden barracks with the construction workers out of near the Camp Hanford Army camp. Mm-hmm. And when I moved into town, I was in one of the two-story barracks buildings because I was single at that time. Mm-hmm. And shortly after about September the next year, I acquired a part of one end of a bee house, which I got married that year, and so I acquired in-town housing. Mm-hmm. But
was there much to do here in Richland in the early 1950s?
Yeah, there was. What we did in the 1950s, we had. I had a very large backyard behind the house, and when I started having children, that was the main playground in the neighborhood. But the different organizations around town, like the medical division and the production, some of the other places like that, had ball teams, softball teams. We had softball teams. We had volleyball teams. We had and there was not a whole lot to do unless you made made it up yourselves, So, of course, I did a lot of fishing and stuff like that, hunting and.
So Hanford was a place where a lot of security was a part of working at Hanford. Did that impact you at all in terms of your work?
Oh yes, yeah. I had a clearance for all for maybe moving around out in the area in the forward area, what they call the forward area, and. I had my badge and my pencils and all that sort of thing could I get into radiation zones or something like that. But I had all the.
Did you have to wear any protective clothing for safety in terms of certain aspects of your job at all, or with?
Very seldom. One or two times that I would get into that type of thing.
And so how long did you work at Hanford then? When did you retire?
39.5 years.
So 89, 90, somewhere in there?
You what?
So 1989, 1990, somewhere in there you retired?
Yeah, I'm 89.
No, I mean, what year you retired?
What year did I retire? I retired in 88.
Okay.
But I stayed on with one of the subcontractors for another year and a half, 2 years.
And you started working for GE. What other contractors did you work for? You worked for Battelle, was it?
Just Battelle.
Okay.
When Battelle took over the Hanford Laboratories, I went with Battelle. So it was Battelle.
So for a good part of the time you were working there, the focus was on production, and at some point that started to shift to less production and then cleanup, I guess. How did the shift in sort of mission impact your work at all?
Not really. I was far enough away from the production that we continued doing just exactly the same, just right on.
President Kennedy came in 1963 to dedicate the N reactor. I wonder, were you there? That day? Do you remember that at all?
Oh yes, yeah.
And what do you remember about his visit or that day?
Well, I could take part of the family out into the area, and there was a huge crowd out there.
I wonder what was sort of the most challenging aspect of the work that you did at Hanford, and maybe what was the most rewarding part of what you did?
That was pretty